Well, let's get started with today's webinar, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mary Eleanor Power, and I am the Director of Marketing and Communications for Dalhousie University's College of Continuing Education. And thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Why Do We Need to Be Agile? Seems pretty obvious, but Kevin's going to walk us through definitely some techniques and some strategies, and as well we'll give you some insight into the Agile Project Management course that we offer at CCE. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. And I would like to just briefly introduce Kevin Aguanno. So Kevin is with Procept Associates and is one of the pioneers in the Agile movement. In fact, he was the first to use the term Agile Project Management back in the fall of 2001 and was the first to promote the need for disciplined, structured approaches to Agile and Agile project governance frameworks. He's written over 30 books and DVDs on Agile and project management topics, is an adjunct professor or lecturer at several universities in undergraduate, postgraduate, and professional development courses, and has received numerous international certifications, awards, and honors. Thanks so much, Kevin, for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm really excited to be here on this session because I love talking about options. I've always loved the flexibility of having choices. I hate to be cornered into doing something the same way every time. I like the fun and the challenge of trying to find better ways of doing things. And I naturally fell into the Agile movement because Agile is about dealing with unexpected change. And when you're dealing with unexpected problems, as the poor fellow on the screen did when he was trying to dig a hole for a swimming pool. When you encounter unexpected problems, you have to change your plans. You got to change the way you were going to be doing things to try and overcome those problems. And that's what Agile is really about, is dealing with unexpected change. It's intended for projects where things aren't going, they're not going to go as expected because the expectations are fuzzy, right? There's going to be misunderstandings, there's going to be confusion, there's going to be, or maybe somebody's changing their mind that that they're still working it out, they're still trying to figure it out, right? So Agile's intended for those kinds of situations, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. Is how do you choose when Agile makes is it appropriate choice, or maybe when other project management approaches are more appropriate. And while there are 4 major approaches to structuring a project from a methodology standpoint, right? We have waterfall approaches, we have agile approaches, but there's others like iterative and incremental approaches as well. So we won't go through all 4 of those, but today we're going to be talking about at least two major choices. Do we go with one extreme or the other? Are we going to go fully predictive, traditional, sometimes it's called the waterfall approach, or do we go with the more change-aligned methods we call empirical or agile methods? And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. And we're actually going to go through a few projects that were in the media recently and see which approach is probably best for those projects, because not everything needs to be agile, not everything needs to be waterfall. We need a mix of choices. And I'm not saying agile is, the cat's meow and it's going to solve every problem out there and it's the best in the world, because it aligns with certain kinds of projects. Not every project is best suited to Agile. So we're going to talk about when it makes sense, right? And we'll go through that a little bit in our session today. As we go through, please feel free to type questions in the chat window. And I know you, Denny and Carolyn, have already found the chat window, and Darcy. So you just type your comments in the chat window as we go through, and I'll read them out and we'll address them as contextually as we can. Mary Eleanor told you a little bit about myself. I'm trained classically as a traditional PM, right? So I've got all my PMPs and all those kinds of things, but I've also got a lot of Agile certifications as well. I know both worlds. My background consists of many different industries. I spent 15 years at IBM, recovering troubled IT projects. I've done work in construction and engineering. I've done work in R&D. I've done work in nonprofits, organizational change, business process change, right? Mergers and acquisitions, a lot in the consulting world. I've done all kinds of projects in all kinds of industries. So I can really figure out where Agile makes sense and where it doesn't. I'll use lots of different examples, but maybe just to get a feel for the group that's on the call, in the chat window, I'd love to see if you can just type in real quick in the chat window, what industry or what kinds of projects do you work on? Like, what's a typical project look like for you? Are you in developing curricula for a school board? Are you working on marketing projects? Are you doing organizational change projects? Just type in the window, give me an idea. Construction project, give me an idea of what kinds of projects you work on. Type it in the chat window, and that way I can maybe use some examples that might resonate better with who's on the call. So feel free to type it in. I got healthcare, currently working on organizing a virtual conference, process improvement, application development, so a little bit of IT, construction, career change, property management. Wow, educational development, ed tech projects, digital learning, education, federal government changes. So we've got everything on the call. Okay, so a new database. So there's a little bit of a predominance of IT and education development, but there's some construction and other stuff. Nonprofit daycare expansion. Okay, excellent. Okay, so we've got quite a mix. So I'll try and use a range of examples as we go through as well. You, Denny, had process improvement. Good, thank you. So I'm going to try and mix it up. I'm going to try and use lots of examples to try and clarify, and hopefully one of them will resonate with you as we go through this the next couple slides. And I only have a few slides with us here today. So first off, in the chat window, when I say Agile, what pops into your head? What words pop into your head? Right? When I say Agile, what's the first? Well, let's play a word association game. What pops into mind? What other words does that bring up? Okay, flexibility. Good. Excellent. My daughter once said to me, "Daddy, you're not flexible. You can't touch your toes without bending your knees." Okay. Adaptability. Bendable, flexible, adaptable. Good. Versatile. Speed, right? Responsiveness. Good. Good. Being able to pivot, ability to use plan B, nimble, comfortable with change. Good, good, excellent. So we're getting the concept of this adaptability, right? Being able to spin, to pivot on the dot, to see a problem and change your approach. And that's really the main thing that we're talking about. When I talk about agility in our processes, it's not just about projects. It's about how we think. It's about how we approach problems. Right? This idea of Agile is just a different way of approaching the problems. Rather than trying to force fit our traditional standard solution to a problem, analyze the unique characteristics of the problem and see if maybe a better approach would work, right? Being a bit more thoughtful when we tackle a problem. Okay, those are all good things though. Being flexible and nimble and proactive and responsive and being, those are all good things. But I bet you when I said Agile, some of you thought of some scary words too. When I say Agile, what negative things pop into mind? And go ahead, just type them in the chat window. Anything scary come to mind when I say Agile? The unknown, certainly, we're going to be dealing it. Flip-flopping, changing your mind, that could cause waste. Unpredictable, forcing the change, inconsistency, uncertainty, looking indecisive. What else? What other negative things can come about from being Agile? Ditch to ditch from senior leadership. Potential risk. Okay, risk. Yeah, absolutely. If we're changing, that means we haven't thought everything through up front, right? If we're adapting to a change quickly, we might miss something. We might take on some risk. Budget risks. It might cost more. There's the potential for rework. If we're changing, change often introduces rework, and that could be costly, right? Financial implications, plans are changing. Good. Okay. There is a difference in the Agile community between what we call structured, disciplined approaches to Agile and let's call them the loosey-goosey approaches to Agile, right? The unstructured approaches to Agile. These ones are largely the most popular, believe it or not. If you think about it, the message from the Agile community for years has been to the doers of the work, the workers, the worker bees, right? We've been coming to the people who design, build, and test things that create value. And we're saying, hey, we're now going to be Agile. That means let's cut through all that bureaucracy. Let's be focused and efficient. And let's just do more of the fun stuff and get some real value done. Now, that sounds like a fun, powerful message, but if you do that loose approach, that unstructured approach, yeah, you can get started with the work quickly, but you're going to introduce chaos at the organizational level, right? We have organizational-wide change initiatives and standards and governance and compliance, regulatory issues. We may have to be compliant with a lot of stuff, and if we're just adapting and changing on the fly, it could cause chaos and rework and uncertainty and budget risks, and you look like you're flip-flopping, right? So if you take the loose approaches to Agile, you tend to get all those negative things that we came up with. But if you use the disciplined, structured approaches to Agile, you tend to avoid those negative things because we're being flexible and adaptive, but within a control framework. This framework is a lightweight framework, but the framework is there to provide some sense of governance over this change. It's not free change with no controls. But it also isn't the onerous, rigorous, traditional change control or change management processes that discourage change because the process is so painful. It's a process that's designed to easily accommodate change, but through a governed process. And this lightweight process allows us to have some predictability, some control, some flexibility, but still able to have metrics and forecasting and tracking to know, are we on track? Are we trending in the wrong direction? So it's those disciplined, structured approaches, which are the ones that are the fastest growing now in the Agile community. It started out with those unstructured, loosey-goosey approaches, but as Agile started to move out of, three guys working in a garage on something into we're introducing Agile into a large enterprise, we saw the need for governance and more governance-based approaches started being applied in an Agile world. So the more recent Agile methods and the fastest growing ones are these more structured, disciplined approaches to Agile. And if you take the Certified Agile Project Manager course that Mary Eleanor referred to through Dalhousie, you're going to be learning that disciplined, structured approach to Agile, not the loosey-goosey approach. You'll get the one that allows some predictability and forecasting and metrics and some control. Okay, so we've talked about now Agile could mean different things to different people based on your perspective. Are you thinking of these loose approaches to Agile or these structured approaches to Agile? But there's a bit more to it than that. Why do we need Agile? Well, different problems that we face or different projects that we tackle need to be solved or resolved in different ways. And I'm going to give you two different examples. One of them is a dart, throwing a dart at a target, and one of them is launching a cruise missile at a target. Now, I apologize for the military example for those of you who are more pacifistic in nature, but it's the best example I've been able to find so far. So let me just talk through these two examples. Let's think about a project. If we're going to start a new project, and we're going to use the dart example. How do you tackle a dart, right? How you throwing darts at a target in a bar? Well, we spend lots of time getting in position. We spend lots of time staring at the board, the dart board, and the goal for that, and I'm just going to see if I can use some hand gestures here. I hope they show up on camera. The goal is to clarify the target so I can see the target, so I can see the bullseye. The more time I spend preparing myself and staring at it, the better I can see the target, the better I can see the bullseye. This is like projects. These projects, the DART projects, are projects where we spend more time upfront gathering requirements and doing design, right? Projects where we spend enormous amounts of time gathering requirements and doing design. What we're really doing is clarifying the target so we can see the goal, so I can see the bullseye. When I have the perfect set of requirements, it's because I can see that bullseye. I know exactly what I have to do. Then what do? We aim, right? On these projects, we spend enormous amounts of time after I can see the bullseye estimating and planning. What is that? That's aiming the dart for the bullseye. Once I have the perfect aim, Once I've got the perfect plan, right? I've got a plan that shows me how to get to that bullseye. I throw the dart, I release the dart. That dart will follow my aim, follow my plan until it hits the bullseye, and I've succeeded. My project is a success. So these projects are all about plan the work, work the plan to execute, execute the plan. It's all about this idea of a perfect plan, this concept of a perfect plan. And that works really well on certain kinds of projects where we've done this project 100 times before. I'm doing just another one. Say I have a business building garden sheds, right? I've built 40 of them this summer. And now I'm going to build another one. I know exactly what I'm doing. The customer chose one of my 10 sets of plans. So I know roughly with a great, well, not even roughly, I know exactly how long that's going to take within within an hour or so. I can predict how long that's going to take. I know how much it's going to cost. Because I have expertise in doing this. I can build the perfect plan. And then we get started, right? I throw the dart. The project's now in flight. The dart is in flight. And it's just going to follow my plan, follow my design, follow my schedule until I succeed, until I hit the bullseye. And as I said, that works really well in certain kinds of projects, but not others. So what I'd like to know, and please tell me, use the, I think we have, let me just check here. It's been a couple weeks or a few weeks since I've used this tool. Is there a raised hand tool on this one? Mary Eleanor, do we have a raised hand tool?
Well, so folks would be able to, I believe, raise their hands.
Okay, let's try that. Let me see if I can see this. So if you have the raised hand tool, just somebody click your raised hand icon so I can see it. Oh, okay, it's working.
There we go.
Yeah, okay.
Look at all those raised hands.
That's perfect. Okay, so let's clear them out. Put your hand down. Okay, now click your raised hand icon if you've ever had a project request from your sponsor or your client or your key stakeholders. If they've ever issued a request like this. Let's get started on the stuff we know while we figure out the rest. Have you ever had one of those? How many of you? Oh, wow. Yeah, so the majority. Okay, hands down. Okay, so in those kinds of scenarios, the traditional DART approach won't work, right? Because you can't build the perfect plan. Because I can't see the bullseye. I don't have all the requirements yet. I can't see exactly where the bullseye is. I mean, I know the target's roughly over here, but I'm not going to be throwing the dart yet because I can't see the bullseye. I need a different approach. I can't just throw darts randomly hoping one of them will hit a target. I mean, after been drinking a little bit, sometimes that happens in the rec room, but my wife gets really upset when I make holes in the wood paneling. Okay, so let's look at a different approach. Or how about this? Raise your hand if you've ever had a project where they said, I'll know what I want when I see it. You ever had one of those? Okay, less, some of you. But thank you. That's very common in visual types of projects. Projects where you're building something that has an aesthetic quality. Like in the ad industry, right? Somebody will say, I need an ad campaign to promote our new product. They give it off to the ad agency. The creative people come up with some ideas. They show it to the client. The client says, not edgy enough. I need a bit more. Okay, so they go away. They change it. They come back again. They'll say, yeah, it's edgy, but I need a bit more diversity in the actors in the ad. Okay, so they go and they do it again and finally say, yes, that's it. That's exactly what I want, right? I'll know what I want when I see it. Or when I was renovating my basement and I was putting together this whole little artistic little thing with glass blocks in this wall. So we'd have a couple here, a couple there, not a whole glass block wall, just a few inserted in the wall. I thought it looked kind of cool until my wife came down and looked at it and said, I don't like, it's not working for me. I ended up just drywalling over the glass blocks in the end. But you know, sometimes you don't know how it's going to look until it's done. And then you look at it and you stand back and it's like, it was cooler in my head than it turned out in real life. So sometimes you don't know what you want till you see it. And that's especially true when you're building intangibles. If my project is to come up with a new policy framework, right? What does that look like in advance? I don't know. But as I'm building it, I start to get a sense with the direction I'm going, and it may change what I'm saying or how I'm organizing my thoughts or my vision of where I'm going. And I might realize that's not what I had in mind. That's not going to work. Or as I said, there's things that are very visual, right? Artistic things, design elements. I'm designing a new website, understanding the look and feel. Those may change, right? Landscaping design may change as you work through. When we're doing mergers and acquisitions, sometimes we can't wait till we have all the requirements figured out before we start merging these two organizations. Sometimes we got to get started on the stuff we do know, like the accounting systems, while we're figuring out the new organizational design, who reports to whom and all that stuff. We can figure that stuff out later. Let's get started on the stuff we know while we figure out the rest. But I can't do that with a dart approach, right? I can't see the bullseye. I can't see all the target. I'm not going to start throwing that dart. I'm not going to start that project until I have that stuff figured out. So we need a different approach. So the different approach I'm going to look at is actually like shooting a cruise missile at the target. Now, there's lots of differences between a dart and a cruise missile, aside from size, weight, cost. There's a few that are significant for this example, for this analogy. One of them is once I throw the dart's going to follow my aim. It's going to follow that path until it hits the target. Right? If my aim is off, the dart will be up, but the dart just follows its trajectory. But a cruise missile, I can steer it in flight. I can launch a cruise missile towards my target, and as it gets closer and closer, if the scope changes, the target moves, my dart would miss, but my cruise missile, I can change the aim and have it continue towards the new location. I can steer that cruise missile in flight. So think about that from a project management perspective. If I had a project with constantly changing scope, in other words, a moving target, I'm going to be throwing lots of darts hoping one of them hits the target. It's a very wasteful approach. A better approach would be launching one cruise missile that as the target moves, the cruise missile follows it. And as I get closer and closer, I'll eventually hit the target. So the cruise missile approach is better when we're dealing with high levels of change. Similarly, remember I said I needed tons of requirements to design up front to see the bullseye? Well, sometimes you can never see the bullseye because the person doesn't know what they want. It's going to emerge. I'll know what I want when I see it. So up front, I can't clearly define the target and the bullseye. I mean, I know the target's roughly over here, but I can't see where the bullseye is yet. So again, throwing darts, I may never want to throw that dart because I only got a couple shots. And if I miss, I'm done. But I could launch the cruise missile towards the target, even if it's still kind of fuzzy. Because as the cruise missile gets closer and closer, while I'm doing the stuff I know, the rest starts to clarify. As I get closer, I start to see the details, and I can fine-tune the aim of that cruise missile so it hits that target. So I kind of need two approaches. The dart approach for where the scope is very clear and very stable. We know what we want. We've done it before. I can come up with the perfect plan or close to the perfect plan. I can throw one dart, and I'll probably hit the bullseye or come pretty close, right? There's a certain approach for that. And then there's a different approach for these cruise missile projects, right? The cruise missile projects are ones where there's a lot of change. The scope is fuzzy. It's a moving target. I'm expecting things to have to adapt as we go. I would use the cruise missile approach. The DART projects, we call those defined projects. Defined methodologies. Why? Because we can clearly define the requirements, the design, the estimates. I can build a perfect plan, right? It's all about defining the goal, defining the path to get there, and then just execute the plan, just stick to the plan. And that works really well, as I said, for projects we've done before, but where there's uncertainty, we need something else. We need the cruise missile approach, and those are called empirical approaches. Empirical because we take observations and measurements as we go, and then we change our process through continuous improvement actions to steer and adapt and adjust to the changes and observations we're making. So we need both defined and empirical processes. Now, if you haven't figured it out yet, a defined approach, the DART approach, an example of that is something we call the waterfall method, which is a traditional approach to project management. It's very much process driven. It's all about defining and locking things down and then just executing the plan. If you haven't guessed it yet, the cruise missile approach is the empirical approaches are the agile approaches. And by the way, agile isn't the only example of an empirical approach. But it's one of the more popular ones today. There are others, right? So these empirical approaches allow us to be adaptive and flexible as we go. Now, just to move down, Gartner Group, which is an IT analytics firm. Now, this is just specific to the IT industry, but the example is more broadly applicable. They say, and they've been saying this for about 4 or 5 years now, that to be effective and efficient, a good IT shop needs to be bimodal. Bimodal, not bipolar. That's a whole other thing. We need to be bimodal. What does bimodal mean? Bimodal means we need both a defined and an empirical process in our organization to have any chance of being efficient. Now, some of you might be wondering, what's going on with that? What do you mean? I need 2 methodologies. Our organization uses one. We use the Waterfall method, or we use Agile, or we've decided we're going to switch to Agile, and that's all we're going to use. That would be a poor choice. The Gartner Group example applies across all industries. What they say is to be efficient, you need 2 methodologies, because Waterfall and Agile are almost extreme opposites, right? We have defined and empirical. They're opposites in many ways. And why do we need 2? Because if we have one at each end of the spectrum, when a project appears, it will appear somewhere along that spectrum between those 2 endpoints. It's usually not perfectly Waterfall or perfectly Agile. It has a little bit of characteristics of each, and it will appear somewhere along that spectrum. If it appears closer to the Waterfall end, the efficient way of managing it would be with the Waterfall method. It's the one that's most closely aligned to the needs of the project. If it's at the other end of the spectrum, we would align it with the Agile. We would manage it with the Agile methods because they're most applicable. So you need these 2 approaches. You round the project up or down to the nearest method to have any chance of managing it effectively, because they use different management techniques. Okay. If you only had one method, though, if we just had one of them at one end of the spectrum and there's nothing at the other end, it doesn't matter if that's Waterfall or Agile. If you only had one method, you're creating a problem for yourself, because projects that appear near that end of the spectrum could be managed effectively with that method. But projects that appear way at the other end of the spectrum, there's nothing up there to manage it with. You have to round it way up or way down to the one method you do have, and that might be a very unnatural way of managing that project. So Gartner Group says to have any chance of being efficient across a spectrum or a wide range of projects in your organization, you need at least these 2 methods, or these 2 modes of working, defined and empirical, or Waterfall and Agile. This is so important that even PMI, the Project Management Institute, who for many years were seen as the bastion of Waterfall type project management, with the change to the PMP exam, their Project Management Professional Certification, starting in just January of this year, said that all project managers to get certified need to know both Waterfall and Agile approaches. They made it a requirement now of the PMP exam to also ask or understand Agile. Half the exam questions now are an Agile or hybrid, both Waterfall and Agile combined, hybrid approaches. So this becomes I think, a very important skill for everyone to learn who's working on projects, who's working in project management. Even if you can't use all of the Agile techniques on your project, some of them will be quite useful. I just gave a presentation just a few days ago to the National Buildings Conference. This is the old BuildX, or construction management show. So they're all building managers and construction engineers and people like that, architects, at this event on Agile construction. It's so big, it's being used across all industries right now. R&D, pharmaceutical research, construction and engineering. It's used across all industries. It got a big boost in product development in the automotive sector back in the early 80s and 90s, before we even called it Agile. IT has been big on Agile techniques since about the mid to late 80s. It's been going on and on for a long time now. This is not a fad. We've figured things out. Basically, Agile is just a refinement of other empirical techniques that were far more bureaucratic and wasteful, that started in the 1920s, right? So some of these empirical methods started in the late 20s, and they got refined and adjusted. And with the big push on waste reduction that we learned from studying the Japanese in the mid 80s, we created these agile versions, these lightweight, less wasteful versions of these empirical approaches, and called them agile in 2001. But before that, they were called the lightweight empirical methods or the lightweight IID methods. There's a lot of different names for them. But Agile's not a fad. It's not something that just popped up out of nowhere. It's not just for the IT industry. Okay, given what I just said, let's talk about some of these projects now and see which method do you think you'd use, waterfall or agile, right? Or defined or empirical. Let's take the first one, vaccine development to cope with the new COVID-19 variant. So we already have vaccines for the base COVID case, and now all these variants are emerging, right? We've got the South African one, the Brazilian one, the British one, the new Indian one. There's all these new variants emerging. So we need to come up with some new vaccines or modify our vaccines to cope with these variants. Does that sound more like a DART or a cruise missile project? Does it sound more like waterfall or agile? What do you think? Herva says agile, Stephanie says agile, Carolyn says agile, Margot, Teresa, cruise missile, yeah. Yeah, you're right. There's going to be so much change. There's new variants coming out all the time. The requirements are changing, that a waterfall approach to come up with the perfect plan for developing a vaccine and then starting a vaccine development cycle, things are going to change. In the middle of that development cycle, there's new variants will emerge, and then we got to go back to the drawing board and start over. You could manage this with the waterfall approach. You absolutely could, but you're going to be, filling out a million change request forms and getting bogged down. The agile approach would be more efficient. It's better aligned with all this change. It's more adaptive to the change. You can adapt to change with waterfall. It's just very paperwork heavy, and it's very bureaucratic. It's slow. Agile's a bit quicker to respond to the change. It's not like there's no paperwork. There is, but it's designed to be done in a more flexible, adaptive way. What about building a home office in your unfinished basement, right? So we're all working from home these days, right? So you want to build a home office so you're not working at the kitchen table. You got an unfinished basement. Let's come up with a project to create an office. Do you think this is more of a DART or a cruise missile, more waterfall or agile? Stephanie thinks waterfall. So does Herva. Can we plan this out? Is there unknowns? Is there uncertainty? Or do you think we can probably get a good vision of what we're trying to envision? Can we build a decent plan? Yeah, probably waterfall, probably the DART approach, right? We can probably define this project pretty clearly. We can get our head wrapped around it. There's probably not going to be a lot of change once we start, right? So probably the waterfall method might be more appropriate for the home office construction. But what about if we were going to renovate a century home that we just moved into, right? This is a brand new, it's new to us. We're moving into a century home. We have no idea what's in the walls. We can't just start cutting holes in the walls without worrying about pipes and wires and if there's structural repairs. Now, all of a sudden, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. There's going to be a lot of unexpected surprises, right? You see those home renovation shows. It sounds simple, and then, the love it or list it or something like that. As soon as they start opening up the walls, it's, we found we need beams. We need to reinforce things. There's cracks in the foundations. Some funny comments in the chat window there. So as soon as you start dealing with uncertainty, maybe Agile's a safer choice because it's more adaptive to that uncertainty. Okay, what about renovating a hospital to create new ICU beds? Is there a lot of uncertainty? Is there going to be a lot of change, do you think? What do you think? Waterfall or agile? This is a bit trickier. So we could do a waterfall approach on this, right? We could do a waterfall approach because the project is fairly well understood, right? We're gonna take some rooms that are underutilized right now. We're going to convert them to ICU beds. We know what's needed in ICU. The scope won't change. The technology won't change either. But this is probably somewhere in the middle, right? This is a hybrid approach because the scope is clear, but we want some of the other benefits of Agile, which I haven't gotten a lot into, which is the ability to take the stuff, start using the stuff we have while we're figuring out the rest, while we're working on the rest. Maybe I can finish 2 or 3 of the rooms and put them into use while we're working on the rest of the rooms. Or maybe they don't have all the ICU equipment, but at least if I can get the oxygen working and some ventilators, that's good enough until we get all the other ICU equipment in these rooms. We can start staffing up these rooms. So this one would be probably somewhere in the middle, more of a hybrid approach. Okay, very good. And some of you picked up on that. So here's an IT project, developing a better provincial vaccination reservation system. So it's an IT project, right? We have one now. Sometimes we have a few. Sometimes they're regional. Different regions will have different in the province. Will have different systems. Stephanie says Agile. Is there going to be change? Probably, right? The government's changing the rules every week. Every time the premiers are opening their mouths, there's new rules, different priorities, different age groups are being prioritized. We're out of vaccine. No, we've got more vaccine. It's coming next week. Oops, it's been delayed a month, right? There's so much change. These schedules, these reservations are going to be constantly changing. The requirements are changing. So probably Agile would be best here, because it allows us to get the basic stuff that we know we need while we're still sorting out the rest. And it's going to be much more efficiently responsive to all the changes that we're going to be seeing. Okay, we have a restaurant. We were shut down for a while. Then we're open, then we're shut down, then we're open. Anyway, we got this big parking lot. Nice weather's here. They'll let us have more people in our restaurant if we can have outdoor dining space because of social distancing rules. If we're outdoors, we can have more. So what would we do? What do you think? Waterfall or Agile? I think this would probably be a waterfall project because the requirements are pretty well understood. There should be no big surprises here. We can quickly plan this out and just follow the plan and execute the project. So that was my goal, to show you that there's different approaches, defined and empirical. You can use either on a project, but as the project gets more complex, as it gets higher levels of change and complexity, empirical methods start to outshine the defined methods. Agile starts to make sense as we get into moderate to higher levels of change. And that's why I think we need both. Okay, I'm going to open this up for questions. Do we have any questions? Just type them in the chat window or in the questions window. In the meantime, while we're waiting to see if there's any questions, I just want to put in a plug for there is a course running at Dalhousie, an Agile project management course. It's a 3-day course. We're running it over 5 or 6 half days because nobody wants to sit online all day in front of a screen. We'll break it up into 3.5-hour chunks. And the way we do it is there's an hour of interactive discussions, kind of like I did here, right? You have a chance to type things in. People have a chance to discuss. There'll be group case studies, group activities, things like that you can do to break up the lectures. There's little bits of lecture, little bits of activities interspersed for an hour. Then there's a 15-minute break. We ask you to leave your computer so you can rest your eyes. You don't get eye strain. Then come back for another hour, then another 15-minute break, then the final hour. Then you're done for the day. Nobody wants to stay all day in front of a computer, right? So we'll do it in chunks like that over several days. That course is coming up. It's called Agile Project Management or Certified Agile Project Manager. And there's several certification exams you can get if you do successfully complete the course, that you can write these certification exams and get some credentials after your name as well. Okay.
Yes, and I've added that to the link to the course in the chat there for everyone to take a look at. And we'll also just include the link in an email that will go out later today, along with the recording of today's webinar.
Excellent. Thank you. It's an excellent course. We always get very good feedback for it. And at the course, you're going to be qualified to write 4 different certification exams. The Certified Agile Project Manager exam, which is actually embedded in the course. The tuition fee includes the cost of the exam. So you actually get to write a certification exam at the end of that course. The Scrum Fundamentals course, if you're interested, there's no cost for that. The Scrum Master certification, which is an option, you'd have to pay for the exam fee, but it's reasonably inexpensive. And then the PMI Agile Certified Practitioner exam. If you want to write the one through PMI, the course would also meet your educational requirements for that certification. So it prepares you for 4 different certifications. Yes, I will be teaching this course.
I just jumped the gun and said that you would be, Kevin. So
yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Okay, we are at the end of our time, but I will stay on for another couple minutes. I know some of you have to go, but if anybody has any more questions, I will stay on for another minute or two, just in case. Thank you for those of you who do have to go. I appreciate your time.
Wonderful. And thanks very much, Kevin. Really appreciate you hosting today's webinar. And please stay on if you do have some questions that you'd like to ask Kevin directly, and we'll wrap up. I'll leave about 5 additional minutes, Kevin, if there are any final questions, and then I'll wrap us up formally.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Some nice comments there. Thank you, everybody. No questions? Very good. Thank you. Any questions about the content of the course? I can talk about that as well. By the way, during that course, we actually take this this little lesson and we dive a lot deeper. We don't just look at empirical and defined. During the first day as the introduction, we actually look at Waterfall, we look at Agile, but we also look at iterative and incremental approaches. We look at all 4 ways of structuring projects. And we actually get in much more detail about the pros and cons, the benefits and the risks of these different approaches. And we do much more. We actually look at 11 different case studies and decide which of those 4 methods would be best for the project. We go through a decision-making model, a decision-making framework, what criteria to consider, little flow charts and things like that as well. That's one of the activities we do on day 1. Excellent. Also on the course, we dive deep into how to. So we get into how do you actually run these projects? How do you gather and manage requirements? How do you build plans differently when the scope is still fuzzy? How do you estimate and come up with a budget? What kind of metrics do we look at on Agile projects? Because those are different as well. So there's quite a bit that we cover. Essentially, a third of the course is about Agile theory. What is Agile? When would you use it? Why would you use it? What does it look like? We teach you Scrum. We teach you some other Agile approaches. And then the second third of the course, days 3 and 4 of the when we break it up into small modules online, are actually looking at the upfront part of the project, requirements, estimating, and planning, how that's all done in an Agile way. And then the last sessions are about what happens during the execution of the project. So dealing with change, renegotiating, replanning, QA, metrics tracking, control forecasting, things like that. Okay, Mary Ellen, I don't think we have any more questions.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well then we will wrap up formally. And thank you everyone once again for joining. And we'll send the link to the course. I included in the chat, but we'll also send it later today. And we look forward to hosting you in the course. It begins June 7th. So please keep an eye out for your email later today. And thanks again so much, Kevin, for hosting today's conversation. Really appreciate it.
Yes, Courtney just asked, she's recently PMP certified. Congratulations. Would this be suitable? Absolutely. In fact, you would get 21 PDUs for attending this course, which is a year's worth of PDUs for maintaining your PMP. So that might be something of use to you as well. Plus, it helps you with the Agile knowledge that you may or may not have as part of your PMP prep training.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you, Courtney, for adding in that question there. Oh, wonderful. definitely aware of the PDU requirement, I'm sure. Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap up there. And thanks so much again, Kevin, and take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your days.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.